I open this hearing of the Community Affairs Legislation Committee into the 2024-25 Supplementary Budget Estimates. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. The committee has fixed Wednesday, the 8th of January 2025 as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice. The committee would appreciate if senators could provide any written questions on notice to the Secretariat by Wednesday, the 4th of December 2024. The committee's proceedings today will begin with the Department of Health and Aged Care, hearing specifically from the Chair of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, Professor Robin Ward AM. The committee will be conducting today's hearing in person and via video conference. Understanding Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session. This includes answers to questions on notice. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee. Such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. The Senate has endorsed the following test of relevance of questions at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operations or financial positions of the department and agencies which are seeking funds in estimates are relevant questions for the purpose of estimates hearings. I remind officers that the Senate has resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has a discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has resolved also that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Witnesses are reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. And I incorporate the public interest... Can we maybe... It's beautiful, but... I incorporate the public interest immunity statement into the Hansard. I remind all senators that as we continue our work implementing the Set the Standard report, that as Chair I will ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous way. And I remind all in the room that this is a workplace and I expect that it is treated as such. An officer called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear. I remind committee members and witnesses who are appearing via video conference and who are not speaking to please mute their microphones. Do we have live captions? We do. All right. Live captions have been enabled for the duration of today's hearing. The feed will be displayed on selected video conferencing monitors at the witness bench and at the back of the room. We ask witnesses to please inform the Secretariat if at any time during the hearing you're experiencing any issues, and they will endeavour to troubleshoot those issues as quickly as possible. I now would like to welcome Senator the Honourable Katie Gallagher, Minister for Finance, Minister for Women and Minister for the Public Service, who is representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Minister, do you have an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
Great. I also welcome the Secretary of the Department of Health and Aged Care, Mr Blair Comley, PSM. Mr Comley, do you have an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
Excellent. I now welcome the Chair of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, Professor Robin Ward AM. Professor Ward, do you have an opening statement?
I do.
Please proceed. Senator Ruston.
Wondering, given the extremely limited time that we have, unless there's something in the statement that is likely to be the subject of questioning, I'm wondering whether it would be able to be tabled.
I think I can see it from here. I think there's 4 short paragraphs, so I don't think it will impede the progress of the committee.
Thank you, Professor Ward. Please continue.
Thank you for the invitation to attend today's hearing. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to answer your questions about the important work of the PBAC and my capacity as Chair. I'm a physician and researcher with specialist qualifications in medical oncology and a PhD in cancer research. In my 30 years in medical oncology, I've cared for many thousands of cancer patients and their families across several major teaching hospitals in New South Wales. I've served in senior academic roles across 3 G08 universities where I've worked to translate important biomedical research discoveries into clinical practice. As a researcher, I've published over 300 scientific papers that have been cited 24,000 times. I've served on the national and international professional bodies, including the NHMRC Council, the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences, and the World Health Organisation Expert Panel on Drug Evaluation. I thank you for rescheduling my appearance before the committee, noting I was chairing the November meeting of PBAC at the time of the department's estimates. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Just to be clear, you weren't rescheduled, you weren't called, so this is the first time you've been called. I'm going to start with the Deputy Chair and then I'll come to the Opposition Deputy Chair. Penny?
I have no questions.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing 3 things at once.
Great. Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Professor Borden. Thank you very much for your willingness to be prepared to come and address us here today. I'm just wondering, one of the things that we discussed at the estimates hearing that you were unable to attend was around the number of submissions that had been received, or applications that were received for the meeting in March, and subsequently the need for putting in, I think you described it as a that the 3-day meeting capacity includes a maximum total number of cost-effective analysis submissions to be fully evaluated at meetings into the future. I was just wondering, could you tell me what is defined as a major submission?
So a major submission is a submission where the sponsor is claiming an additional therapeutic value of the medicine and hence asking for an additional price of that medicine, and hence that incurs greater financial cost to the government. So those type of submissions are extremely complex to analyse, requires a lot of external evaluator capacity in order to analyse those submissions and get them in a format that can then be returned to the sponsor for their responses back to the critique, and then go through multiple subcommittees of PBAC and also consultation with clinicians and external consumer stakeholders in order to form a complete package which the PBAC can then see. So they're very complex submissions.
So the 38 submissions that you're referring to as being the high number that were received eventually in terms of applications for the March meeting, those 38 submissions meet the definition that you have just provided. How many other submissions were received that would have required external evaluation?
I can check that number now, but in the March 2025 meeting agenda, there were 6 other submissions requiring external evaluation. They were of the more simple type of external evaluation.
Okay. So when you do your normal analysis, I try to understand what the information that I've been given by your officials, Secretary, at the last meeting, and the information that I could gain from going through various publicly available documents. It seems as if there is a Category 1, a Category 2 evaluation, then there's some other evaluations that are in relation to particular re-evaluations of medicines, and then if you add those all up, it comes up to what is categorised as a major submission. But from what I'm gathering from what you're saying, that wouldn't be what a major submission is. So a major submission. So explain to me the difference between a major submission and a Category 1 and a Category 2 submission.
Yeah, I think the terminology of Category 1, 2 and others are a little bit confusing. The real difference between a major submission is a submission where the sponsor is claiming an additional therapeutic value for that medicine and hence is seeking a higher price. So that's the sort of submission that requires complex economic modelling and complex evaluation. Submissions where the sponsor is saying the drug is the same as the drugs that are already available is a simpler evaluation. Yeah. So that's essentially the difference. Yeah.
But I mean, if I try and work through the information that's contained on various parts of the Department of Health website and PBAC, etc., it becomes really confusing about what is the category. They refer to Category 1 and Category 2. They refer to standard re-entry. They refer to early re-entry, and they refer to major. and if you try, in order to try and understand what's actually happened here in relation to the demand that's on your organisation or your part of the department coming into March, it's really hard to get some sort of understanding of what has been the change. Mr. Comley, you made a comment in that there were 38 major submissions, 25 being the record previously in 2017. I couldn't find anything that matched up to that. And you also made the comment that 22 this meeting, so I was assuming you were talking about the meeting that Professor Ward was at, which was the reason she couldn't attend, 22, but I can't make that add up either. So I'm trying to understand, like, you using all these different terms, and I just don't seem to be able to get to the bottom of it. I mean, I don't want to go through a complicated process here of trying to explain, but would there be some way that you could provide us with information about, you know, how you have previously categorised these submissions and what the categorisation of the submissions coming into the March meeting were, so that we can get an understanding of apples with apples, because I can't work it out on the basis of all the information. So back to the comment that on the PBS website, where it says, and I quote, that in relation to the March, in relation to the determination around the fact that there would be a limited number of major submissions that were able to be considered in a meeting, the PBS website says, agree that any 3-day meeting capacity includes a maximum total number of cost-effective analysis submissions, which will be fully evaluated and progressed through the usual 17-week cycle steps to be accessible for decision-making purposes. So does this sentence that's in here refer to the maximum number of submissions that will require external evaluation, or does it refer to what you've just described as major submissions?
Penny Shakespeare, Deputy Secretary, Department of Health and Aged Care. Look, I think that statement was made based on the contracted evaluator capacity that we had in place at the time. That statement was made, which I think was around mid-October. That's when the department was also working with our contracted providers and others to identify additional capacity. So, in fact, there are more than that number of submissions that have highly intense clinical evaluation requirements that have now been sourced for the March meeting.
So I'm not talking about the March meeting. I'm just interested to understand, this is a permanent sort of statement.
No, that was based on the contracted external evaluation capacity we had in place at the time, and we've since been able to increase that.
So does it refer to what Professor Ward has just referred to as major submissions, or is it all submissions that require external evaluation that you have flagged as potentially at any 3-day meeting?
No, it's those that require highly intense evaluation. So I can run you through the categories.
No, I don't. We won't have time, but I really would be very interested in receiving that information at some stage or another. That would be great.
We can take that on notice for you,
Thanks.
Senator.
Thank you very much. So in making this comment will include a maximum total number of cost-effective analyses. Is there a number that's attached to that, or are you just flagging that you are in future will accept that resource constraints will limit the number of submissions that will be considered into the future? I'm not sure who's...
Perhaps if we can provide some context. So on average, we experience, I think, 17 submissions that require that level of intense external evaluation at a meeting. The highest, as the Secretary provided information about at our previous hearings, previous sort of highest number of submissions that had required that intense evaluation was 25 at the November 2017 meeting. So, you know, it's not necessarily something that we have experienced very, very often. We will work as hard as we can to find the evaluation capacity we need to meet the submissions that are brought forward. So, you know, that's an ongoing piece of work, I think.
Okay. So I'm just...
Senator Duncan McIntyre, First Assistant Secretary, Technology Assessment and Access Division. If I can just add to that, so the November meeting that's just passed, when compared to that 25, the November meeting that we've just had 22 of those most intense category of submissions, and we have scheduled for 38 of those most intense submissions to go to the March meeting. So really we've done everything we possibly can to provide as much capacity as possible to the March meeting.
Did any submissions that were advised that they were to be triaged from the March meeting before it was known that there was going to be an additional meeting in May, which we didn't find out till sort of 3 or 4 weeks later, have any of those been reinstated for the March meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
How many?
So, Senator, altogether of the 38, there's 28 will be in the March meeting and 10 will be in the May meeting. So initially we had, I think it was 23 initially, and sorry, I don't have that number in front of me right now.
So, so what you're saying to me is that there were 5 that had been advised that they weren't going to be heard in, or considered in the March meeting, that have subsequently been now reinstated as being considered in the March meeting.
That's right. I'll just verify that that's correct. But basically, what we've done is we have found some additional capacity, and as a result, we've been able to schedule some additional major submissions over those that we had previously advised sponsors.
So in determining which ones were initially determined as to go into the March meeting, and then subsequently which were the additional 5 that were to be reconsidered for the March meeting, what was the framework of assessment of determining which ones were in and which ones were out?
I might ask Professor Ward the criteria that PBAC used in advising how they would set their agenda.
So on the 10th of October, the department let myself and my co-chair, Ms Jo Watson, know that because of the unprecedented demand on the external HTA service providers, that we wouldn't be able to receive the totality of the information for the March meeting. So we then decided to convene a full meeting of the committee, and that meeting was held on the 16th of October. And we went through those submissions, but we relied on our standard criteria for how we assess submissions, and we can provide that information to yourself at a later date. There's quite a lot of lists.
Yeah, and I'd really be interested in understanding the 5 that you have subsequently reinstated to the March meeting. What the basis of that, and what was the correspondence that was received between PBAC or possibly the department and the sponsor or sponsors. I'd be interested to know how many different organisational sponsors were involved in that 5. Were all 5 from the same sponsor, or were they from different sponsors? So some information around that process would be very valuable too. I'd also be interested, were there any medicines that were excluded or triaged out of the March meeting, either initially or eventually, that had been given TGA priority for fast tracking? Were any of those deferred from the meeting?
Have to refer that to the department.
I think we'll need to take that on notice, Senator, and check.
Yeah, sure. And if that's the case, how many? And if you could, if there were any, if you could provide reasoning why you would have triaged out a priority medication.
Senator, if I could just say that the number that there were before, the number of external evaluation required submissions that we initially advised sponsors was 32. One of those 32 withdrew, and because it was an extremely complicated one, we were then able to add an additional 2. So the number went from 32 to 34 altogether, because we added 1 to replace the withdrawn one, and that also allowed us to add an additional 2.
Yeah. Okay. Were any of the applications that were received originally received for March subsequently have the process through which they were going to be assessed changed and downgraded, so that they were no longer requiring the full PBAC process? So either for internal evaluation, or is there any other evaluation process that a medicine can go through?
we'd have to take on notice to be conclusive, but I don't believe so.
Yeah. Okay, so just back to the original question in relation to the maximum, or the whatever, I might make sure I get the terminology right. Yeah, the meeting capacity, maximum total number of cost-effective analysis. Is there a number that's associated with that?
Senator, can I think we traversed this in the last estimates. There's no intention going forward of putting on a maximum number of submissions for a particular meeting. The intention is that we are exploring further contingency arrangements that should we ever get another surge of this size, that we'd be able to accommodate it. So this is really a reflection of what the HTA evaluation capacity was at the time, but there's no forward-looking intention to say there's going to be a maximum number. We're now looking at other ways to expand our HTA evaluation capacity.
Okay.
So just to give you I'll rotate the call in a couple of minutes.
Okay. So the other thing too, in terms of having a look at those 5 additional ones that have been put back in, I'd be really keen to understand if any of them were a result of a sponsor demanding that they be reconsidered. So I'm just wondering, how many HTA reviewers are there in Australia? How many people would have the capacity to be an HTA assessor in Australia?
Senator, I think that we could provide you with an estimate on notice. I don't think we've got that here, but if we had a look at the number of individuals that are working for institutions where we have contracted them...
sorry, that wasn't my question. I'm talking about more generally in Australia. How many HTA assessors are there in Australia who would have the capacity to do the work? And I'm keen to understand, of that number who could do the work, how many of these do you use and do PBAC use, and of the ones that are not used by you, how many are excluded? Obviously that number would come out. Why they've been excluded? Is that something we were able to get the information on?
So, look, I think we will certainly be able to provide you with an estimate of the overall HTA
capacity,
qualified workforce. But we'd probably need to talk with our partners about, untapped capability, which we have been doing. We've also found individuals that have retired and things like that and asked them to, sort of come back. But
sorry, I don't think that was my line of questioning. Sorry, Ms Shakespeare. It was more around how much capacity is there in Australia that is excluded from being able to be used because of the guidelines that are in place in relation to who is able to be an HTA assessor? Because, I'm assuming you've got a panel. It says on your website that there's a panel of institutions that are sort of preferred, I suppose, in terms of using them for assessment. And so how many other assessors... So if you're not approved, obviously there'll be some that you will tap for surge workforce on occasions. How many would you not tap? So what is the capacity in Australia that you exclude from being able to use because of the criteria that you determine, and has that changed of recent times?
So our panel providers have been through approaches to market and have been assessed against, open criteria for applications, value for money, things that we're required to put in place for our contracts. We can find additional capability. We've got to go through the same sort of processes to ensure value for public money where we are looking for additional capability, but we've managed to source that in some cases. I don't think that there is really a problem with particular evaluators not being able to be used. We do have to go through normal government processes to contract people and ensure those value for money requirements are met. And we also need to manage conflicts of interest. And, that's probably the main thing that we would consider, quite carefully if we've got a person that's currently employed by or doing work for a company that might be the competitor of a company's application that we're looking for assessment capability for, but we don't sort of say you're not usable in any capacity. We'd look at how those conflicts of interest could be managed. Could that person be put to work on a different set of submissions?
So have you changed your conflict of interest guidelines or assessment criteria in the last few years?
I'd have to take on notice when it last changed. I'm sorry,
Okay.
Senator.
I'm just going to rotate the call at this point and then I'll come back to you. The Deputy Chair doesn't have any questions, but Lisa Garland does. Senator.
Thank you. Maybe this is for Ms Shakespeare in the first instance. I was wondering, it would be helpful for me as a new member of this committee, if you could just outline the process for a drug listing that is undertaken, perhaps not in great detail, but just a bit of an overview would be very helpful.
Certainly, I might actually ask my colleagues.
Just to understand, you mean the listing process once PBAC has approved a drug?
Yes.
Yeah, so there of course are a wide range of processes that Professor Ward has briefly outlined that go into the process of assessing drugs as to whether they are effective and whether they're cost effective, and that leads to PBAC making a recommendation. That recommendation is shared with the sponsor, and we commence negotiations with the sponsor based on PBAC's advice, and invite sponsors to make a proposal to government about whether or not they would be willing to list both at the price and with the restrictions and other conditions that are proposed in PBAC's advice. Usually that process takes some time. It's not uncommon that sponsors need to think hard about whether they're willing to meet those conditions, and they come back and forth with us to clarify the conditions under which they'll be willing to list. If that then leads to agreement, then depending on the cost of that agreement, in some cases there are delegations within the department, in some cases the Minister for Health has delegation for approvals, and in some cases it's a matter for consideration by Cabinet. So the department then manages those processes to seek agreement to the financial consequences of listing. If government agrees through that process to a listing, then it goes into a process of working out with the sponsor whether they have adequate supply, and ensuring that we work with the IT vendors that provide the software that's used by prescribers and dispensers to ensure that it's really clear how that's going to work. We work with our partners in Services Australia to ensure that they're in a position to remit payments to the various parts of the system that require payments as a consequence. And once all of that work's done, it gets listed. And so when we talk about a meeting of PBAC, it's really a process that goes all the way from the notice of intent that we've discussed at the last estimates hearings through to the listing process and the various parts of that process, both through PBAC and through the negotiation work and the work we do with pharmacies.
Senator, that comes after all of the evaluation work, and there are quite a few steps for that as well, if I can just sort of walk you through some of those. So we get notices of intent for a meeting, and that was, when we first sort of realised that we had a very large number of very complex submissions that have been lodged for the March meeting next year. Then we have a further process where the submissions are actually lodged, and sometimes there can be changes and a company decides that they're not quite ready to go ahead at that point, or didn't get a TGA delegates overview in time if they're not doing parallel processing. So once we've got the submissions in though, they're allocated to external evaluators. That's if they need that economic evaluation. We then publish the agendas because we need to let lots of people know that there are submissions that they might want to comment on. So that could be clinicians, it's also patient groups. We get a lot of information from patients and individual patients as well as patient groups that needs to be collated and provided in through the committee structures. We invite those consumer comments. We have the external evaluation happen. Then we have economic and drug utilisation subcommittee meetings, and they provide advice on the submissions through to the main committee. Preparation of submission overviews, and we have 3 opportunities during this process for the applicants to comment on the materials and the advice that's coming through the evaluators and the subcommittee meetings. So there's quite a lot of steps, and then we get to a meeting, the recommendations are made, and then there are all the steps that my colleague Mr McIntyre went through. So it's an involved process, but it happens overall quite quickly. We do tend to get medicines listed as quickly as we can.
That was going to be a follow-up question. So is there an average length of time from beginning of what you talked about to the end of what you spoke about, Mr McIntyre?
Senator, the time that we have, if everything goes perfectly, is 17 weeks from go to woe. Yep. But there are a variety of reasons why it can take longer than that, and indeed we commonly hear much longer figures put about. The most common reason why it takes longer than this period of time is back and forth that we need to do with a sponsor in order to be clear on what they're offering, and for them to have the opportunity to consider whether they are willing to agree to the listing conditions that PBAC have proposed. In some cases, sponsor companies determine that they're not comfortable with the conditions that PBAC have proposed, and in that case a sponsor can basically decide not to list. Sometimes they initially decide not to list, and there are cases where they might wait several years and then decide to list on the conditions that PBAC proposed. In other cases, they choose to go back to PBAC with further information or with a proposal of a different sort. For example, restricting the population of patients that can be treated to a different, perhaps a smaller population, and proposing perhaps a different price. PBAC will reconsider that information. Depending on how different it is, it could be a relatively straightforward process to reconsider it, or it could require an additional formal re-evaluation of the whole process. So it's very hard to say how long it takes, because it depends very much on the extent to which a sponsor has good clinical information to support what they're proposing, and the willingness of the sponsor to be responsive to the proposal that PBAC has recommended.
And the PBAC evaluation component of the process takes 17 weeks.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So, Senator, also, of course, I've mentioned there that if the fiscal impact of the drug is large, and there are some very large listings on the PBS, then it requires consideration through cabinet processes, and you may be aware that those processes are probably more complex than even the ones I've proposed here in and of themselves, and that's only a part of the process that we have here.
Yeah, thank you. And so, you know, recently demands for evaluation have exceeded the capacity of evaluation resources available. I was wondering if you could explain whether this has happened before, and if so, you know, how common is that perhaps over the last decade or so that we've had this issue?
Senator, it has happened before, but not commonly. I would have to take on notice a full list of occasions, but there have been not very many, but more than one when that has happened, and in those instances we've in discussion with the committee, we've worked out how we might accommodate that additional capacity. Usually that's been done by moving it to a further meeting, or or being able to schedule an additional meeting or additional time at a meeting. So there are a few, but I'd have to give you on notice how many occasions that is and what the circumstances were around those.
Shakespeare, I've got, it's not the full list, and we can provide on notice, but I think the most recent example when this happened was in March 2022, where we didn't have quite enough capacity, and we had some of the submissions, a small number, I think about 2, that were evaluated for an intra-cycle meeting, which was the next available consideration. Similar, we had 6 submissions, I think, in November 2017 for a PBAC meeting that were reprioritised to the following intra-cycle meeting. Although I think some of those were eventually brought forward because others had withdrawn. So we'll look into the exact numbers, but it has happened on a few occasions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Ruston.
Thank you. Just interested to know, when was the decision made for the May spillover?
The additional meeting.
Yep.
I think, isn't that public when that was made?
I think it was
No,
announced.
I'm asking when the decision was made, not necessarily when it was made public.
The decision.
I think it was the 6th of November that it was announced. We can check to see if the decision was made before that.
Who recommended the decision, and whose authority was it to make the decision to hold the meeting?
I think it was the minister's request. I have directed the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee to hold an additional full meeting in May 2025. That was on the 6th of November, that media release.
Okay. So the
I
question...
imagine it would have been very close to that time.
Yep. So I'm interested to understand, it was quite clear, obviously sometime before the 9th of October, that you were heading into territory where resources were going to struggle to meet the demand for the applications that were received. I'm assuming you didn't get every application on the 9th of October. So I'm just interested to understand what actually happened in the lead up to the decision that that number of applications were going to be triaged. So what action did the department or PBAC take in order to try and mitigate against the issue that was obviously coming down the pipeline? The minister's just admitted that it was a month later before the minister directed that an additional meeting be held.
Senator Ruston, we can take you through what happened between the 9th of November and the direction of the minister. I think if that's what you're getting to.
No, that's not what I'm...
Well, no, because you're trying to imply that there was some delay between the 9th of October and the 6th of November, and I'm going to say to you there was a lot of things done between that time. There was the 9th of October when the notice of intent applications were received from sponsors. That's when they knew that there was 77, and from that day on, there was a series of steps done to manage what everyone could see was going to be an issue.
Yeah, look, I'm acknowledging that, Minister.
Right, okay.
So I'm just keen to understand. So the ministers had to make a direction on the 6th of November because of the concern that was obviously had been raised about the potential impacts of this. The decision. So I'm keen to understand, like for instance, did the department or PBAC or make any attempt in terms of determining surge workforce? Was there any attempt to look for international assessors as an example for that?
Can I just comment, and maybe the Minister on my bit? We did table a detailed timeline of this at the last estimate.
You did, but you didn't say anything about this.
Well, it says I'm reading from that time. On the 11th of October, the department contacts HTA evaluators to gauge capacity and makes inquiries into alternate resourcing options. So that's 2 days later.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about international. I just asked a question about international.
Well, you asked a question about did the department do anything, including international, which I'm sure we can answer.
Look, I mean, I don't know why everyone's being so defensive. I really am genuinely...
Well, you've called us back for spillover after 14 hours.
Senator, this is not a spillover with the greatest amount of respect. We understood that Professor Ward was actually at a 3-day meeting of PBAC. And in
it is unusual
to
call the chair of PBAC to estimates.
Well,
it hasn't happened in my time.
It's unusual to put a cap on the number of submissions that are going to be considered.
There is not a cap, so don't verbal the evidence that's been given tonight. There is not a cap.
Okay, Minister,
You've been trying to run that in the Parliament as well, and it's not right.
I will put this on the record, and I'm reading directly from the PBS website. It says that the PBAC agreed that any 3-day meeting capacity includes a maximum total number of cost-effective analysis submissions which will be fully evaluated. So I'm not
where was the word cap in that?
So a maximum total number isn't a cap?
Well,
I reckon
that
if
is
you look
about
at
how they manage a workload through a meeting, which is normally not an issue. But when there is 77 notice of intents from sponsors, don't you agree there has to be a way to manage that? Or are you arguing that a 3-day meeting can deal with 77 notices of intent?
Senator, all I'm simply saying is it's written on the PBS website. It doesn't refer to this particular meeting. This says that any 3-day meeting capacity includes a maximum total number. Now, I would contend that the maximum total number is a cap, but I'm just trying to understand what has subsequently happened to make sure this doesn't happen again, because if you have a look through the numbers that I've tried to look through, as I say, they're difficult, and I thank Professor Ward for offering to get, and Ms Shakespeare for getting me this information. But it appears as there is often a surge in the number of applications that are received by PBAC in the lead up to an election year. And if you have a look at each year of an election, that seems to be the case. So there would be some suggestion that this may have, the trend may have been anticipated. So I'm keen to understand, yesterday on LinkedIn, there is a notice gone out for staffing in relation to the Office of the Health Technology Assessment Branch, looking for people with critical thinker with analytical skills capability of supporting the evaluation of new health technologies. I'm just sort of interested, this is yesterday, so I'm interested why it took so long for that
Probably because there's a vacancy.
Be the case. But the point being here, Minister, is that this is a really serious situation.
So when it happened in March 2015, November 2017, March 2024, the same issue, which was managed the same way. Did you have similar concerns then, Senator Ruston?
Well, I have got concerns that we have got a cap put on this time. Look, I don't know why everyone's being so defensive.
I'm trying to understand what your point is. You've called the chair of PBAC here.
Well, I'm about to ask her some questions.
You've been running questions in the Parliament trying to scare people, saying that we've got a cap on life-saving medicines. So forgive me for being a little bit cynical here.
Well,
we are explaining a situation that's being managed in accordance with the way that you managed it when you were in government.
Well, Senators, from this point, can we just return to the question and answer partisan estimates? I know it's the end of a long week. So, Senator Ruston, you have the call.
Yeah, so I'm just keen to understand, we asked during estimates if there was a possibility to provide the list of the conditions that the medicines that were being applications, what they were proposed to treat. Have we been able to get that?
Senator, we certainly will provide that information on notice. Things have been changing since the first notices came in, the submissions that arrived, the additional information and capacity. So things have moved around a bit, but we will certainly get you the list of medicines. In fact, I think we'll be publishing the agenda for the March meeting very soon. And then, following that, we'll also be publishing the agenda for the May 2025 meeting.
Okay.
That will take a bit longer because we do need to work with sponsors about what information is put on the agenda, checking to make sure it's accurate. But we will certainly get it out before Christmas this year.
Okay. Well, maybe turning to you, Professor Ward.
Yes, Mr. Comley.
Senator Ruston has raised a number of times the question of expanding capacity, and I've said last estimates are now that we are attempting to do that. I'd also note that the HTA review that came out, recommendation 49, made it clear that we should look at further education expanding the HTA workforce, so the government's actively considering that. As I said at last estimates, we do want to have contingency in place, including accessing international HTA. So that even if we got an unprecedented surge like this, we'd be better placed. So I just want to make clear that that is the direction of travel. There's no intention to make a limit on the capacity to evaluate. We're just trying to put the things in place so we protect the integrity of the system in terms of the quality of assessment.
Thanks, Mr. Comley. Senator Ruston.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. Professor Ward, I mean, there's no secret there's been some commentary around your other roles that you also undertake. So just interested, how many days a week are you actually contracted to work for PBAC?
So I work for PBAC on a part-time basis. It's a 0.6 role, and I undertake the duties according to the expectation of duties required for PBAC, and that involves chairing the main committee, chairing the intra-cycle meetings, meeting with department members, meeting with the deputy chair, meeting with sponsors, meeting with clinicians, reviewing the materials that are provided to PBAC, writing documents. So there's a full set of duties there that I undertake in order to fulfil the requirements of the expectations of the role.
And I'm assuming that on that basis, if you're working 0.6, that you're paid 0.6 of the salary.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. I'm sure that was the case. And so you have recently, if I'm correct, taken up a role as the at Monash University?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and is that role full-time?
That's a full-time role.
Full-time role. Now, I understand you've also gave us quite an outline of your eminent career so far. You do a number of other things in sort of like in a chair capacity, is that correct?
A couple, but I'm happy to go through them for you if that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. Well, I understand that you are the chair of the MRFF Genomic Health Futures Mission Expert Advisory Panel. Is that correct still?
I am chair of that at the moment, which is just about to finish. That was a very short term.
Sorry, what was the name of that panel?
It was the MRFF Genomic Health Futures Mission Expert Advisory Panel. You're still the director of the Translational Cancer Research Network?
No.
No, not that anymore. The co-joint professor in the Prince of Wales Clinical School at UNSW, not that anymore.
Would it be easier for her to just say what she's...
Yeah, sure. Please.
So I have a number of roles currently, but most of those are ending very soon. So I've resigned from the University of Sydney on the 12th of November, and in consequence of that resignation, a number of other roles end. They include the Non-Executive Representative Director of the Westmead Institute for Medical Research, that's a non-remunerated role, the Non-Executive Representative Director of the Centenary Institute of Cancer Medicine and Cell Biology, that also ends on that role at that date, the World Health Organisation Expert Advisory Panel on Drug Evaluation, that also ends. I'm a visiting medical officer, as a medical oncologist at Westmead Hospital in Sydney, that also ends in January. And also advise our Cancer Institute New South Wales, that ends in February of next year. And I have a role with Telstra Health, Non-Executive Director, that also ends in February.
Did you say Telstra?
Health.
Telstra Health.
Telstra Health ends in February.
Okay. So I'm just, a number of these you're saying are ending, but obviously a number you're continuing to do. You have a 1.6 job even before you add all these additional things. So I'm keen to understand, I mean, maybe back to you, Mr. Comley, or you, Ms. Shakespeare. I mean, it strikes me as we've got a situation here where, we've got a real challenge around resourcing to make sure that we are able to get assessments on medicines, and as eminently qualified as Professor Ward is there any concerns that we should be actually putting a full-time person into this role as opposed to part-time? And I mean no disrespect whatsoever to you.
No, I mean the previous chair was part-time for the full 9 years of his tenure.
And what was Mr. Wilson's, Professor Wilson's?
My recollection is he was 0.8.
He was 0.8. Also during that time, we have developed and put in place other arrangements to support the workflows for the PBAC, including the PBAC executive, which meets regularly, and our deputy chair, who's also appearing here today, who's full-time.
Can I also make another point, because I think Professor Ward did go through some of those other non-executive representative director roles, but that's not uncommon in a lot of senior positions that you have. For example, I'm the chair on the board of the Australian Sports Commission. It's sort of part of my role. I could be on the board of the Digital Transformation Agency, the Digital Health Agency. They're kind of adjuncts to the role.
Do you get paid for those positions?
It's part of I think Professor Ward said those ones are not paid. They're part of the obligation.
I'm assuming Professor Ward, you're paid at Monash University.
That role is paid, but I think the other roles that we were talking about there, I'm not paid for.
So I mean, with the greatest amount of respect, Mr. Comley, it's a little difficult to make the comparison between. Obviously, the roles that you are undertaking very much sit within the portfolio responsibilities of the Department of Health and Aged Care, which includes the Office of Sport, and obviously you're a very senior public servant who's probably in demand for your expertise. From what I can gather from what Professor Ward has just said to me, that she's been paid, sorry, I won't verbally, you're sitting in front of me, you're paid 0.6 of the salary that's associated with being the chair of PBAC, which I think the chair, the role was a $400 and something thousand role, which you're receiving 0.6 of, and then I'm assuming you're receiving a full-time remuneration for your full-time role at Monash. So there is a difference between being paid a salary of 1.6 FTE and you doing voluntary work as part of your role as the Secretary of the Department. With the greatest amount of respect.
Senator Ruston, I'll ask Professor Ward to comment, but I think the academic appointments do work a little bit differently across the board. It's a very long time ago, but I was a junior academic and it was standard conditions that you're allowed to do other paid employment, particularly where that paid employment was complementary to your work because it was seen as building your skill base. In the case of Monash, my understanding is that they made it clear publicly that they saw this as complementary to the role at Monash and would provide appropriate leave for Professor Ward to undertake the duties of PBAC. I think different industries, different areas are different, but in academia it's quite common to see the synergies associated with undertaking, in this case, the pinnacle of HTA assessment in Australia with the academic role that builds on those skills. I don't know if you want to add anything, Professor Ward.
No, I think from the point of view of working at 3 GO8 universities as full-time roles and then moving to another university, I've been involved in HTA roles in all of those while I was working as an academic, and they've all provided me with the opportunity to work in these other roles. As the Secretary says, Monash has agreed to provide flexibility for Professor Ward to fulfil all PBAC-related duties as the Chair, including preparation for and attendance at PBAC and executive meetings, post-listing meetings and other requirements. This arrangement allows Professor Ward to contribute her expertise to both Monash and PBAC, and each of my academic employers have all provided the same arrangements for me.
You're not expected to be sitting at a desk 9 to 5 every single one of those days?
No.
And certainly from the government's point of view, we you know, with the CV like Professor Ward, we are incredibly pleased to have her in that position, managing all of those different competing pressures on her time.
I'm not suggesting for a minute that Professor Ward isn't eminently qualified to be the chair of PBAC. I'm just, I suppose, expressing or seeking to get a greater understanding of, we've got a situation where by the very, I mean, PBAC themselves, these are the minutes of the PBAC meeting, Professor Ward, where you signed your name to saying that any 3-day meeting capacity includes a maximum total number of cost-effective analysis submissions.
That's not to do with time. That's to do.
Are you going to let me finish my comment, or are you going to interrupt?
Well, I think we've run out of time, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it was guaranteed I was going to.
I'll let you finish a question, not a comment.
Sure. So I'm just really interested, as I said, there is absolutely no suggestion whatsoever that Professor Ward is eminently qualified to be the PBAC chair. I'm not suggesting that for a minute. What I am suggesting is that we have run ourselves into a situation where Professor Ward, by her own hand, has admitted to the fact that they are now putting a maximum total number of submissions that are going to be considered at PBAC meetings. We have, with the greatest amount of respect, it seems like there has been quite a delay in trying to provide surge capacity in terms of.
Well, I don't think we accept that at all. That's your assertion,
okay,
Senator
fine.
Ruston.
Well,
we do not accept that. And you have the timeline, and you've
that is my
all
assertion.
of that has been provided to you.
I have. That is my assertion.
Yep, it is, and it's wrong.
And the fact that I don't seem to be able to get any real clarity around assessors that are available. What we're doing in relation to conflict of interest in terms of excluding certain HTA assessor capability in Australia, and there is a limiting of evaluations. We have a chair who is part-time despite being eminently qualified. We haven't a limited maximum number of submissions. It really does. I was going to say this really does point to there. I would like to be convinced that this is not a go slow process to reduce the spend on HTA. But when I get the additional information from Ms Shakespeare, hopefully that is alleviated. But at the moment, it looks very much like a cost minimisation strategy. Thank you.
Okay, because there's no question coming, I'll just give
I don't agree with that either.
officials an opportunity to respond if they would like, and then we'll close the hearing.
It's got nothing to do with cost minimisation. I just want that on the record.
Okay. Is anyone seeking a response?
I just think we need to be clear that it's the chair's availability is not the reason that some submissions had to be reprioritised to an additional meeting. It was really the external evaluation capability, which we've been working really hard to increase, and we have increased, and so more submissions can go to the March meeting. We're going to keep working on that, as the Secretary said, and we'll set out a lot more detailed information for you in the questions we've taken on notice.
Thank you, Ms Shakespeare. It being 6 o'clock, that concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared and to Hansard Broadcasting and our Secretariat for their assistance. I remind senators that the committee has agreed that any written questions on notice should be lodged with the Secretariat by Wednesday the 4th of December 2024, and that answers to questions on notice are due by Wednesday the 8th of January 2025. The committee stands adjourned. Thank you.